recognizing that we do work in a environment in an ED where burnout is real. Like, that happens because we see crazy stuff. You see all this stuff and you have to find a way to process it, but trying to also keep that connection with patients. So I can see where it happens. I just think it's that insight of my own behavior is what I control. So how do I engage, and how do I want to be, and how do I want to show up?
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing, and welcome back to the podcast. I have a special treat for you today. I had the opportunity to sit down and interview Jennifer Schmitz. She is the 2021 President-Elect Candidate for the National ENA. I got to tell you, I didn't know Jennifer real well going into the interview, but I am super impressed, and I think you're going to be too. I think the organization is going to be in good hands with her. So, with no further delay, here's my interview with my new friend, Jennifer. The first question I'll ask, and I'll just ask you to get started with,
Sure.
Tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do now, and a little bit about your background before you were doing what you're doing now.
Sure. So who I am certainly is an ED nurse, but probably first and foremost is I am a mom to 5 children.
Oh my. I'll keep you busy.
Yeah, we have quite a big family. My husband and I both have been married before, so it's a little bit of a Brady Bunch combination of kids. But we also have adopted the 5th one, who was a friend of ours, and his parents have both died. So he now is part of our family. And so we have this amazing big clan of people here who keep it interesting every single day.
I bet.
And my husband is an emergency physician, so we kind of have similar brains or similar styles. Personalities are opposite, but both kind of wired for this work. And we always joke that the conversations at the dinner table are probably more maybe different than some other families where both parents don't participate in ED work or have that kind of chatter. But our kids get used to it and find it amusing sometimes and gross other times.
Yep. Yeah. That'll scar your children for life, I'm sure. So.
Yeah. Yes. My daughter always says, "Did you put tubes in today anywhere?" To my husband. That's her usual question. She's the youngest and the only girl of the 5 kids. So
poor thing.
But otherwise, so today I'm the interim chief nursing officer at Southern Maine Healthcare. Southern Maine is a community hospital, part of a larger health system that I've worked at since I was a new grad nurse. And so I've been there almost 19 years. And started in the ED as a new grad, and have spent all of my time kind of in that department or managing that department over the years. I was the nurse educator first, after about 6 or 8 years working on the floor, and then became the nurse manager, then the director, senior director, and now the chief nursing officer. But the ED still reports directly to me. It's probably something I have a hard time letting go of too. So that department is not only my area of expertise, it's sort of like that's been my family the whole time I've worked there. So
yeah, it's probably hard to let go.
Yeah. And again, it's how my brain works, so it feels the most comfortable in terms of clinical background. So that's where I am today. It wasn't my original plan. I got into nursing because in high school, I was 16, and we had a student rescue program through the fire department. And you could become a student rescue member and go on calls at the time, they were a volunteer service. So you would leave the high school, run across the street, jump on the ambulance, and go on the call with them.
How cool is that?
I did. Yeah, it was amazing. And I think about it now, and I'm like 16 years old. I saw some crazy stuff.
I bet.
But I did it because I had a crush on one of the boys who was already in it. And so I joke now, I'm like, I don't know what I would have done with my life or my career if it hadn't been for that. So because I did that program, I decided to be a nurse. And once I knew I wanted to be a nurse, ED was pretty much all I was focused on. I got my paramedic license and degree while I was in nursing school and started that work before I was a nurse.
Nice.
So, yeah. So it was, it just kind of made sense. It all clicked together. And then maybe 5 or 6 years into being a nurse, I decided to go get my NP and thought I would leave the ED and go be a nurse practitioner. I had no plans on leadership at all, and that kind of fell into my lap. The nurse manager job was an interim at the time, and then I think it was 10 years later, I was still in that kind of role. So it turned out to be just fine, and my path took a different direction than maybe I had intended, but it's worked out really well. And I, up until this year, have worked clinically the whole time. And nice. So I think from a leadership standpoint, that was probably one of the most important things for me, was to be able to sort of do, I guess if you want to call it walk the walk and talk the talk, be able to do the job that I was asking of others, at least in the area that I was clinically competent, right?
Yeah.
So, as my leadership role expanded, I had OB and med-surg and some other areas that I hadn't worked in before, but felt like I still wanted to keep that connection in the place where I could still jump in and pick up wherever, needed. So, and then COVID kind of threw everything into a different path, a different set of responsibilities. And so I haven't done it this year, but up until now I have. And I think that has been probably one of the most important things for me along the way, that I was able to still do that. I enjoy that. So
that's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of where I landed today.
Nice. Now, how big is your hospital?
We are 225 beds. We have 2 campuses, though. So they're split campuses, 2 EDs within that. One of our EDs is 29 beds and the other's 15. So it's about half the size, but both community hospital setting type.
Yeah. Okay. So if all your life was completely changed and you weren't able to be a nurse, what do you think you would have done?
I don't know. If you had asked me before I went to nursing school, I didn't have another plan. Now, if I had any other career to pick, it would probably be to own a bookstore that has a coffee shop. Probably nothing in this at all. That'd
be pretty cool. That'd be all right, right?
Yes, I have this dream of owning a bookstore that, and it's probably, people that own bookstores would probably laugh at me and say it's not really as quiet and amazing as I imagine it to be. But yeah, it's also totally different, and I can't really imagine doing anything else, which is probably why it feels so extreme to be imagining this bookstore idea. But the reality is I don't even know. It just feels like this is what I'm intended to do.
That's awesome.
I don't know that I would find anything else.
At what point in your career did you decide that, like, this was it? Like you knew that this was the time, this is what you were supposed to be doing?
High school, I think, for sure, honestly. And it sounds young now, but I really didn't know. I was a junior in high school when I started it. I had no idea what I wanted. no particular interest, nothing, no direction. And once I started working in EMS, I was hooked. And really, at the time, so EMS schedules allow you to work these second jobs. So my full intention was to work full-time as a paramedic, and then in my off days work as a nurse. And so I did that for about 3 years. And because I was working 24-hour shifts, and I only worked, 10 days a month or something ridiculous, and had part-time as a nurse. It was a great deal. I was 22. And then fully realized that the 24-hour shifts are harder when you start to think about kids and things like that. So transitioned out of that in a full-time capacity and went full-time nursing.
Yeah.
That.
So
But still to this day, I have my paramedic license, I have my nursing license, I have my MP. I kept it all.
It's hard to let that stuff go, huh? It's hard to let that stuff go.
Yeah,
even if you don't use it. Like for the longest time, I kept my New Mexico EMT license, which did me absolutely no good in Texas. But I was always like, but I worked hard for it. I don't want to let it go.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I had an associate's degree in paramedicine. I feel like it was part of me, and it's what prompted me to get where I am today.
Yeah. What? How do you think? So, how long were you a paramedic before you became a nurse?
So I started as a basic EMT when I was 16, and then took my intermediate class when I was still in nursing school, and then moved right into my paramedic program. So I graduated first with my paramedic, and then a semester later with my nursing degree.
Holy cow! So it was like boom, boom, done.
Yeah. Yep.
That's cool. What do you think? So I hear from a lot of paramedics that are going from paramedic to nurse. Now, you did it in such a short time that you may not have had the same issue that maybe a more experienced paramedic would have going into nursing school. But what would you see were like the biggest similarities between nursing school and paramedic school, and then what were the biggest differences?
Nursing school, like the actual coursework, it was more in depth, certainly more comprehensive in some areas, and less immediate fix. So we weren't, we don't leave nursing school trained to be an ED nurse.
Absolutely not.
You're trained, with this kind of general basic knowledge. And so I think that was the gap for me. Being a paramedic is completely the reason I was able to do ED nursing well, even as a brand new grad.
Yeah.
So I think the two went well together in the timing. But EMS, that sick, not sick, and learning how to triage quickly and know who's in trouble, who's not, that's completely paramedic training, at least where I got it from and where it kind of got honed for me. And I see that now still as something that new nurses to the ED struggle with. And, they doubt themselves and they're not sure and that kind of hesitance. But working in the field, you have this, and if you were an EMT as well, it's a different level of independence and autonomy and decision-making that you have to be comfortable with on your own.
Yeah.
Certainly with guidance, but you're the one sitting in front of a patient in someone's house trying to make a decision. That really helped me transition into the ED as a nurse.
Yeah. What's something about emergency nurses that paramedics need to know?
I think that the paramedics should have that appreciation for, even as an ED nurse, I kind of see it in phases, that the paramedic really is sort of the beginning piece. The ED nurse might be the middle section, and then the inpatient nurse is maybe the longer section, but that the ED nurse still needs more information even than the paramedic needed. And so in terms of stepwise care, just having that appreciation for they might need more, and the the thought process and the treatment plan is even a step more comprehensive than what they had in the field. And just having that appreciation of each other's role, and not that people are, not appreciating what one did or the other, but that really they're supposed to complement each other. So getting more information, further care, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, we should be working together.
Absolutely.
And I do think that's the case most of the time. But I feel like sometimes the hospital world gets more complicated, and even the documentation is more cumbersome, and that maybe changes how the perception can be between the two, handoffs, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah, I think having the appreciation for both, I think makes it really easy. A lot of the nurses that I grew up with had EMS in their background, so they had a different appreciation for folks than I think those who didn't certainly had. In that they were like, okay, we know what it's like out there. We know that they are the eyes and ears, and we know what valuable information they can bring to the table that we're not going to get otherwise. So I think that makes it kind of cool and kind of interesting. So tell me about a patient that changed the way you practice.
There's two that come to mind, and for different reasons. The first was it was my first true, and by true child abuse, meaning like actual injuries that were head to toe injuries, not just suspicion, but it was the full. And I don't know that, I think I was a little naive I knew that it happened. I knew that it was there. I knew that we screened for it, but it hadn't crossed my world yet. And I think the timing was interesting in that I was like 38 weeks pregnant with my son.
Oh.
And so this baby was maybe a month old. And so it was, the irony of my timing with this, it was a little boy, was probably more, made it more substantial for me in terms of the experience, but it was the first time that it had really been there in front of me. I think that was one for me that it just changed my perspective, and maybe those things that people tell you can happen, I finally saw happen. Mm-hmm. And so that was one. And the second was actually a behavioral health patient that she would come in multiple times a day, sometimes, and sometimes not for a few days, but we all knew her by first name. And she had it was a really sad story, but I think what I learned from it is she would yell at us, occasionally some physical violence towards us, but challenging patient at times. And I think over time, what I realized with her or any patient sort of in that situation is that not letting that frustration of repeat visits or bad behavior and things like that change how I treat someone. And I still think of that now, that, we use the word, personally, the word frequent flyer a lot. It isn't that I don't like it. I'm not, but I put it in the mindset of the patient, even if they come to us 3 times a day, that's their life. And how awful is that, right? That we are their sort of go-to all day, any time of day, all the time. And so their life must be really hard or not all that fun outside of this setting. And so
good point.
Rather than sort of get frustrated with the fact that they're back or they're here. And she was one that was there often enough that I got to like practice this and figure this out for my own sanity, because I think it contributes to burnout and frustration and all of that other stuff. But that if you just treat them like a human every time they come in, and keep that perspective that they're here, this is not a good life, right? Being in the ED all the time is not what anybody wants for their life. It may be the only thing they have. And so I think about that still now, because we still have people that they label as frequent flyers, or they say are that, and that are challenging, and behavioral health, and, alcohol, and all that other stuff that we see a lot of. Yeah. It isn't that we should tolerate, being yelled at or hurt or that kind of stuff. It's just my own delivery to that patient should be like every other patient. And we're all human. That can be hard. But it's also what we're here to do. And so I think I remember her name, her face, all of that stuff. She's the one that shows up for me when there's that kind of, some people call it that crusty, like ED nurse behavior, there to just say, you know what, you're taking care of people all the time. They're still a person. Yeah.
And I think sometimes
it's hard in the job.
I think sometimes we forget that, like, they're still people. Like, somebody loves that person.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and they care about them, and maybe their circumstances, whatever they are, were out of their control, right? And so where they are today, they might not have chosen that. It might just be where they landed. Yeah. And so kind of cutting them that slack, not permission, to treat us badly. That's not what I'm saying at all, but just to be, it doesn't help to be frustrated that they're there again, because it doesn't change that they're already there. Yeah, so
it doesn't change. Right. Regardless how you feel about it, they're here, and they deserve care, and they need care. And one of the things I always reminded new nurses that even your frequent flyer who comes all the time, at some point he's going to be sick. At some point, they live kind of a hard life. At some point, they're going to be sick. At some point, they're going to really have something go on. And if you don't pay attention, if you don't treat them like a new patient every time, you could easily miss it.
Exactly. And you can also be the one that helps them.
Absolutely.
If you're nice and they, so I think that's maybe what I hold on to more now.
Absolutely. I remember one patient telling me once, she's like, you're the only one who's ever nice to me. And I'm like, that just breaks my heart, because everybody should be nice to you. But you're right. Sometimes I think we have those people who are kind of crusty and kind of, maybe a little burnt out, nurses. And some people wear that like a badge of honor, but then when you're like, but that doesn't really, what purpose does it serve? Like, I'd rather work with the nurse that wants to take care of patients and feels good about taking care of patients. That's who I want to work with. I don't want to work with the crusty
and I think
nurse.
Recognizing that we do work in an environment in an ED where burnout is real. Like, that happens because we see crazy stuff. You see all this stuff, and you have to find a way to process it, but trying to also keep that connection with patients. So I can see where it happens. I just think it's that insight of my own behavior is what I control. So how do I engage, and how do I want to be, and how do I want to show up?
Yeah. We talked a little bit with that. You talked a little bit about burnout. How do you think nurses can best kind of combat burnout? And you've talked a little bit about that already, but it seems to be pretty prevalent in nursing right now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have an answer yet. It's actually one of the things that in my, if this election works out the way I think it is, and you headed for a president role in the ENA, the part of it is to figure out what is your platform, what is your thing that not only is my passion, but that helps our profession as a whole or leaves some kind of mark. And it's probably COVID that sparked it for me, because I think COVID changed why people are burnt out, maybe in some way. It's a different reason, it's a different stress, but I think it's going to increase some of it. But it also changes our recruitment into the specialty. So I think there's both there. But burnout in and of itself, I don't know that and again, this could be different in different areas or size hospitals, but I'm not sure that we all process what we see and do in a way that supports avoiding burnout or sort of minimizing that.
Good mental health.
And yeah, because there are things that are just sort of part of the specialty, right? You kind of have a weird sense of humor. You can tolerate certain things and put up with certain things. I also think we're really good at compartmentalizing and like shutting down certain things, because in some ways it's how we do the job and how we keep it together when you need to. It's then giving yourself permission after to not and to feel that stuff. That's hard. Or it can, I think in a lot of cases it can be. Some people may nail this, but I don't know that we put enough focus on not getting burnt out when they first come in and start, and how to prevent it from happening.
You mentioned COVID and kind of the additional stressors that's putting on healthcare providers. If you had to look into your crystal ball, what are your fears, or what are your hopes, or what do you think is going to happen? What do you think? How is it going to change nursing a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? If you had to guess. And of course, this is nothing we're going to hold you to. We're asking you to look.
I mean, I think about like the PPE, not the supply of it, because I think we're more comfortable with that, certainly, and that was a larger problem. But wearing PPE at work changes some of how you interact with people, not your words, and you have choice over that, but a lot of our communication is nonverbal. And if you can't see a face entirely, it changes some of that. Yeah. So I think it's forcing us to get creative in how we communicate, particularly in the ED, in stressful times for people, right? They're not planning to be there. Something could have been completely unexpected. And so that's a skill set that not everybody has just at baseline. And so how do we then manage the work that we're doing and still kind of keep that patient connection? I also think that COVID, maybe we'll know more after this, kind of anticipated flu season and what happens this winter, but this has changed our world almost entirely in every type of unit. It's hard to know if we'll ever go back from this to things like, I don't know, we didn't wear masks before, right? We only had these N95s for TB patients generally. And you could probably count on one hand how many times you wore one, depending on where you are, I guess. But in a certain amount, in a year, how many times did I put my N95 on? Probably just for fit testing. It just wasn't a day-to-day work. So I think there's parts of our jobs now that are going to be permanently different.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'd be curious to see how it impacts people coming into nursing or new grads, and what the
good question.
Turnover rate does, and how people see this. If you're coming into nursing at this point, what does that do for you? Is it, I don't know, versus having known sort of another environment before COVID and now experiencing COVID. But so many people are coming out of school right now. I don't know what it'll do to that group. I don't know what that means for the 5 years from now. Where are people? Do they want to do this anymore, or do they not? I think they will. But some of the high areas like EDs may be harder to keep people in for longer periods of time.
Maybe a little harder to staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What do you think is going to be one of the things I've been thinking about lately? I recently did a TNCC class, and we did TNCC in person with a much smaller class. But I know so many people are doing it right now online. What do you think the impact is going to be? These changes we've made. Suddenly now Zoom is a viable option, and I think people have realized that it's a decent option for education. I've just been kind of thinking about it. Like, I don't think we're going to get that cat put back in that bag. What do you think is going to be the impact?
I agree.
What do you think is going to be the impact on education for nursing, like post graduation, post certification, or post licensure education?
Yeah, I'm actually, in some ways, we talk about, do you thank COVID or do you not? The thank part of this is it forced us a little faster into the technological options for education.
Yeah.
Do I think that will replace all education? No, absolutely not. And so the getting back to in-person stuff will still be valuable. But this gives us an opportunity that we didn't have before the conference is a great example. Having our conference virtually it's a bummer, right? Because we don't all get to see each other in person. But what a cool option to be able to do a conference with literally everybody could be sitting at home. And so you lose some of the social connection with people, but you're still able to deliver content to a larger group. And so I think for us, that opens up a lot of opportunity to reach out to different groups. But I wouldn't want it to replace entirely in-person, communication and kind of connection. That's not it. But I do think it's a nice kind of push towards we can do this a little bit better in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to change the way we deliver education for the rest of time. I think it's going to be a fairly permanent change. Like you said, I don't think it replaces in person because even doing our even when we meet face to face on Zoom and we're looking at each other, it's just not the same as being in that same room. And there's nothing like, and anyone listening, if you haven't had the opportunity to go to a conference and be with your peers from all over the world, there's nothing in the world like that. It's the coolest thing ever. And no Zoom in the world is going to replace that. But certainly some of the classes we do, monthly, yearly, every 4 years, sure, there's no reason we can't do that on Zoom.
Yeah, and it didn't stop us, right? So we weren't limited by not being able to host in person, and I think that's the cool part is, we were forced into this kind of virtual path, but we figured it out, and we were still able to, because, no one knew in March how long this was going to last. It's September today, so it's 6 months later, and we still kept up with most of that stuff. Which is pretty impressive, rather than saying we didn't do anything for 6 months because we couldn't. So that part, I think, is, again, faster pace maybe than we would have preferred, but really got us to a point of flexibility with that type of class. And, if you think about it, nursing schools, most of this online coursework was already there for a lot of people and a lot of degrees. And so now we're just kind of upping our game on the continuing education side. Absolutely.
And I think that's going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Cause is it going to be the end all be all? No, I don't think so. I mean, it's too much of a human touch, be right there kind of thing. But I certainly think that there's going to be, I certainly think there's going to be a piece of nursing school now and forevermore that's going to be that will probably have an online component.
Yeah, and I think about the conference, if you were able to offer both, say next year we're past some of this and we can do in person, but we also have it online. We kind of got there before, but that's some of that flexibility. So now we have better methods to get the online out for people who might not be able to travel and get to the conference and, all of that other stuff. So we may hit more people by having both options available.
It's a really great point. Really great point. Next year it may be in person and digital.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is kind of exciting. So that's cool. Now, you mentioned ENA, you mentioned the outcome of the election. You're running for?
This year I'm running for President-Elect, 2021 President.
How exciting is that? A little intimidating
Yeah.
to think about taking the reins of the organization?
Yeah, it's a little scary.
I bet that's true.
But
That's true.
It's also one of those things where, as an ED nurse, and I swear most of us probably feel this way, like it is how I'm wired. Emergency nursing is just how I feel like that's part of my makeup. It is probably one of the greatest honors I never planned, but could have ever imagined to be able to be in a position to potentially end up in the president of this organization. So, if you asked me 20 years ago when I started, if I thought I would ever be that or be able to do that, I would have been like, no way. So it's amazing. I feel really grateful to even be in the position.
When you initially ran for board, what made you decide to run for board? And what was that like?
I was the president of Maine at the time, maybe it was almost president or just turned president, and had been on a few national committees and just liked I really enjoyed meeting other people and kind of learning outside of Maine. So maybe a downside to my career is I've only lived in Maine and I've only worked in a community hospital setting. So I was learning so much about ED nursing in other places and how people do things, and thought, wow, this is really not only my professional organization is pretty awesome, but I have an opportunity I could participate even more. And so the timing was right in my personal life and my work life and all that. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. Let's see what happens. And I felt like my leadership experience at work and in my job would be helpful to my role on the board. And got it. The running joke was, though, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but people said to me after, we've never even heard of you before. And so
you're like, come on.
It worked out in my favor. But, I'm the kid from Maine. I don't know how else to describe it. It's, I may not be the biggest name out there or the most well-known, but I was appreciative for the opportunity and hope that, the 3 years I've been on the board so far, that's been as much of a value for the organization and the members as it has been for me.
What has been the biggest, for going from being a member watching the board, I think of General Assembly when you have all those folks kind of in the audience watching the board up on the stage. What was the thing that changed your perspective the most when you went from being on the floor watching the board to being in the board?
Two things, I think. The first would be the working relationship with the staff at ENA is amazing. That senior leadership team who, sits in our board meetings and works really closely with us is, most of them are not nurses, right? They don't do our job, but they are 100% committing to our profession. And that is amazing to see. Like, they are just as pumped about ED nursing as we are. And so that's pretty cool. So I had
That's cool.
I didn't have that level of insight on the staff and how they all operate is really, they're there for our profession. And that sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but to see it in action really kind of changes your perspective and level of appreciation for what they do. And the second, I think, is just hearing from members. And you have that opportunity when you're a member, certainly, but you have to I had a different chance to meet more people from different areas. And so we're assigned, we have board liaison states every year. It's usually 5 or 6 states. And you normally, aside from this year, would go visit each state. I've been to places I never would have gone otherwise, and seen their hospitals, met their staff, met their other, members within the state, just heard from and met so many other really cool people that do the same work we're doing. And so that was awesome. It puts it in perspective for me, what we're doing. And I say I'm the kid from Maine in one hospital, but there's so many hospitals that are just as challenged as we are with the same things, just a teeny little difference maybe for their area or their type of hospital. But so it sort of reinforces that so many of the things that all of us are facing are not unique to our hospital, but really just across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What do you hope to accomplish as president? It's a tough one.
I think I would jokingly tell you that they know who I am at that point, but that's totally a joke there. But I really think to be able to, and it's hard to say because the organization is in a good spot, but leave it a little bit better than where it was when I, came into that role. And I think that's a tall order given how well it functions today. But I think there's always room for a little bit better and to raise our bar a little bit higher each year.
Yeah. That's a great answer. The last question I ask everybody in the podcast is a question that I call 3 things. It's a little bit of a hard question, but what are 3 things an emergency nurse should always remember, and what are 3 things a nurse should just forget?
3 things you should always
remember. An ER nurse should always remember.
The first is don't ever stand up your GI bleed. Everybody makes that mistake once in their career, myself included.
It's a good point. Doesn't always work out, does it?
Don't ever stand them up. The second, I think, goes along with what I said earlier, is that remember the people you're taking care of are humans as well. And they're somebody's family and somebody's someone.
Yeah.
And the third is that I don't know if it's what they should always remember or do, but your coworkers are your team. And so take care of that team, focus on them. And because none of you in the department and the shift can do the work you're doing without one another.
Absolutely.
And that makes a difference.
Absolutely.
The 3 things you should forget. I say forget the labels. Ditch the labels on people. It sort of relates to what I said earlier, but that the sense of humor I get, but some of it is stop labeling people. The second thing would be forget. Okay, don't forget nursing care plans. Because you won't use them in the ED.
Right, yeah. It just
Someone will get mad at me for saying that, but and forget your ego. That's the third one, I think, is leave that at the door, because you're as smart as you are, as good as you are, you can still mess up. And so leave that at the door and ask questions. And if you're not sure, ask. We're in a business of taking care of people. It matters. Your ego does not in that case.
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank Jennifer enough for taking the time to talk to me. As you know, I always say that if you're not part of your professional organization, you absolutely should be. So now is the perfect time, if you haven't done so yet, to join the Emergency Nursing Association. Now is a great time to do that. And if you are an ENA member, now is the time to vote for your organization leaders. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you check your email to find out how to vote, but get your vote in. Every vote needs to be counted, and historically, the voting turnout has been fairly low for ENA. So let's try to make that a little bit higher this year. You vote for a candidate you think is going to best represent your organization. Thanks again for everyone for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate you being here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share this podcast with a friend. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great shift.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.